Wow, this dollar store microscope is really a cheap piece of trash. Hey, speaking of something that isn't a cheap piece of trash, let's talk about one of the best 1960s sci-fi movies out there, Fantastic Voyage.
Stand by for injection.
Right.
Fantastic Voyage is really a good movie, and I don't think it gets enough hype. It's easily one of the best sci-fi movies of the 60s. You know, the 60s were a pretty okay decade for sci-fi, all things considered. Pretty much the only sci-fi movie of the 50s that I would consider groundbreaking is Forbidden Planet. But the 60s had their fair share of really revolutionary and groundbreaking and game-changing science fiction entries. 2001 is only one of them. Fantastic Voyage easily qualifies as another. Fantastic Voyage has a really fun premise that I don't think is done enough in science fiction, and that's what if you could go inside the human body? When I was young, I was really into anatomy. It was my jam. I would be like, heck yeah, I want to learn about what goes on inside of me. So to think that in the future, you could shrink yourself down and go inside someone's bloodstream, that was just awesome, you know? You could see every biological process up close. Now, I've said in the past, I don't like scientists, but I am a big fan of cool shit, like microscopes that actually work, unlike this dollar store toy. And if I could have a microscope and look at little shit, you betcha I'd be on that microscope 24/7. Unfortunately, real microscopes are expensive, so all I have is this cheap thing with like orange light coming out of it. What an embarrassment to science. Anyway, yeah, Fantastic Voyage is an excellent movie, and I'm surprised I was never shown it in any of my biology classes that I took. I was shown Lorenzo's wax, I was shown Gattaca, I was shown Osmosis Jones, obviously, which I think is an equally good movie about the human body. Definitely an underrated one, and one that I might review sometime. But Fantastic Voyage is one of those movies that's just, you know, it's very pure sci-fi. It has a premise, a hypothesis, and it follows that premise to its logical conclusion. And that way, it's a lot like, you know, the Andromeda Strain or something that's just about scientists at work. And I don't think too much sci-fi is really about that. Fantastic Voyage is a great movie about the human body. It's very educative. I am honestly surprised that I was not shown Fantastic Voyage once in any of the biology classes I took. In high school, middle school, anywhere, you know. And maybe it's because, oh, it's too old, people won't identify with it. We gotta show them Osmosis Jones because it's got Chris Rock and Bill Murray. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, Osmosis Jones is a fun cartoon, but Fantastic Voyage really has some crazy fun things to say about the human body. And to this day, it remains the only movie that covers the human body in such detail, the microscopic world in such detail. They have, of course, movies like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but let's be honest, it's definitely not even Rick Moranis' best role. It's owned by Disney. I guess now Fantastic Voyage is owned by Disney now too, because now they own all of 20th Century Fox, but, you know, I'm saying originally it wasn't owned by Disney, so, you know, I mean, if something isn't originally owned by Disney, I give it a pass, you know. Fantastic Voyage is just a really darn good movie, in a lot of ways, and I think it needs to be appreciated more and discussed more, because it's just one of those movies that you should really watch if you haven't, because you're missing out. Like, why haven't you watched Fantastic Voyage yet? So let's discuss it from just kind of a filmmaking perspective. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know much about this science stuff. I've never had the opportunity to buy a good microscope, but if we look into this cheap dollar store microscope, maybe we can discover the secrets of Fantastic Voyage and just what made it such a good, gosh darn movie, and why all these years later it still should be watched. Fantastic Voyage, obviously, was the breakout role of Raquel Welch, one of the great actresses of the 60s. And it's easy to look back at her career and say, oh, it's just because she was hot. Well, that's a very reductive viewpoint. All things considered, she's a pretty good actress. And, you know, her role in this movie is the woman who comes along, and throughout their adventures and trials through the human body, she's never, you know, treated as a lesser or anything. She's treated as an equal by the members of the crew aboard the little submarine, and you know, it's very wholesome. And you know, the main guy is a typical straight white guy, and he's like, yeah, kind of hot. And she's like, watch out, Buster, I'm gonna shoot you with this laser.
Nice young lady. You play with the damnedest toys, Miss Peterson.
Which I thought is just very funny and forward-thinking for the time. You know, she's like, yeah, keep your hands off me, or I'm gonna shoot you with this death ray. I just thought that's, you know, a fun little touch. And you know, she's treated pretty much equal. There's one bit at the beginning where one of the army guys, you know, is like a big sexist, and he's like, we can't let a woman go along on this mission. And you know, obviously he doesn't win out, and you know, that's nice. I think Raquel Welch is a good actress, you know. I mean, she's not like Cindy Crawford or Pam Anderson, who only got famous because they have, you know, nice figures. Oh man, I'm horny. Raquel Welch is actually an okay actress, and she definitely proves that she has what it takes in this movie. You know, good actress. But the standout performance in this is from Donald Pleasance.
I can't breathe.
Dr. Michaels.
I can't breathe.
Dr. Michaels!
I've got to get out.
You know, Donald Pleasance is one of those actors who you'll definitely recognize if you see enough of him. One of the classic Shakespearean type British grand actors, you know, Laurence Olivier, Patrick Stewart, you know the type. He really brings his all here as the villainous saboteur. Oh yeah, also spoilers, he's the saboteur. He's kind of a bold guy, and you can pretty much determine right off the bat that he's the saboteur. You know, he's obviously like got very villainous characteristics. He looks kind of like a little weasel. But, you know, one thing I find really interesting, and this recurring motif in the film, it happens twice, I believe, is the other doctor, Dr. Duvall, I think, is talking about how the human body is so intricate, it must have an intelligent designer. And Donald Pleasance's character, Dr. Mitchell, is an atheist. And, you know, sure, he turns out to be a bad guy, but I really like that an atheist point of view is given, and he's like, nah, there's no intelligent designer behind this, it's just the result of millions of years of evolution. And sure, he's the bad guy in the end, but I really like the character. He's a lot of fun. Donald Pleasance obviously had a lot of fun playing him, and, you know, it's just a lot of fun. And I think the dynamic between, you know, on the one hand you have this scientist who's, you know, a scientist, but he's also a fervent religious fundamentalist, and then you have the scientist who's just an atheist and doesn't give anything to this intelligent design stuff because it's just a load of hoke. And that's really ahead of its time, because that's still an argument you see, like, you know, Kent Hovind and stuff using today. Oh, it must have had a designer, because how do we get here if there ain't a god? And to think that this movie tackled these themes all the way back in the 60s, that's just really ahead of its time.
One of the miracles of the universe. The engineering of the cycle of a breath.
Well, I wouldn't call it a miracle. Just an interchange of gases.
Another huge plus for the movie is its sets, both outside the body and inside the body. The military facility looks really nice. It's full of fun, cool old computer equipment, all this analog stuff, reel-to-reel machines, buttons, and cathode tube TVs, and is a big fan of old-fashioned tech. You know, I just look at that and I'm like, man, what I would give to spend a day in this wacky lab full of 60s appliances glued together to make a giant military-industrial complex. It's just so cool. And I think that's something that people don't see much of, 60s computing. 60s computers are pretty cool in their own right. The 60s were the first decade when people actually began taking computers seriously. I think the computers in this movie look very, they've got very handsome cabinets. They look well designed. Whoever, designed them for the movie obviously had a good grasp on what was technologically possible for the time. This looks like a machine that could actually shrink people. I mean, sure, it's expensive, but it looks like an analog machine that could actually shrink people to that size. And I think that's important for a movie of this scope and premise. You've got to have realism. You've got to have you've got to immerse the audience in your world. The only effect that I didn't believe in this movie came near the beginning when the main guy is sitting in a car and they're lowering the car into the government facility. It looks like the car is shrinking, and at first I thought that's what was happening, but then it's just getting smaller as it goes down. And I just feel like there'd be a better way to fix that up practically, like they could just have an elevator or something and lower the car down on cables, and it'd look more realistic. All the scenes in the submarine look really good, but this one shot with the car just looks, the geometry isn't right or something. But everything else looks so good. And this is because, shocker, it's all practical effects, no CGI. Wasn't even heard of at this point. So to think that they could make a movie about a group of scientists traveling inside of the human body in a tiny submarine in the 60s with zero CGI just goes to prove what a useless invention CGI is and how you can do absolutely anything without it. You got some really cool proto green screen tech in this. You got nice shots of them in the submarine and then the stream outside, and you got all these crazy cellular metabolisms going on. It just looks so good, and it's so beautiful. Everything in this is like a cartoon fantasia, and there's some really nice animation effects added on in post, obviously, especially in the sequence in the brain. You have all these neurons firing, and they look like these fun snowflakes, and it's just like, wouldn't you like to be in this place if it was possible? And, it's probably not how the human body actually works. Actually, it might be. The human body's a disgusting place. The anatomy in this movie is simultaneously really, really beautiful and really, really realistically disgusting. Like, it just looks so, so gross. One of the biggest drawbacks to this movie, obviously, is that, they only have 60 minutes to complete the task and get rid of the blood clot or whatever. And that's really, that's to put pressure on the characters and make the whole movie feel like a countdown. On the other hand, it would have been funner if they could just go wherever in the body they wanted. Admittedly, the movie does make really good use of the time it has, and since the movie is only like, I believe, 1 hour and 40 minutes, with about 35 minutes in the beginning to explain and set up the characters before they get miniaturized. They get miniaturized in like 35 minutes, and then they start deminiaturizing at like 1 hour and 35 minutes. So in real time, it is actually 60 minutes that they're spending inside this guy's body. I just think that's really interesting. A movie that progresses in real time, and the time you're seeing is actually the time they have. And, that's just a really cool concept. There is the bit where they have to go inside the heart, and they only have 60 seconds. And I counted it, and it was more like 2 minutes. But, creative liberties, I guess. It doesn't really make sense, because like if in the movie 60 minutes pass and in the actual runtime of the movie 60 minutes pass, then it'd be the same for the heart sequence, and they really should have taken that into account. But they tried their best. I can't really blame them. Some of these shots in the heart are so cool that you just gotta linger on them, because they're so cool. So, their mission is pretty straightforward. Get shot into an artery, fix the plot, and then get out of there. And all things considered, it would take like 15 minutes at the most, you know, in and out. But what this movie does really well is it puts them on a detour, because there's this big whirlpool, and they break through into a vein, and they gotta go through the heart, and they gotta deactivate the guy's heart for like 60 seconds. And then they go through the lungs, and they got to get air from the lungs, and then they go into the inner ear, and Raquel Welch gets attacked by antibodies, and then they finally get to the brain, and there's just so many cool set pieces, and I think this movie makes the most of the 60 minutes it has to take fun little detours to all the different organs and say, you know, we'll have to do something here, we'll have to do something here. The main guy, who almost doesn't go along with the mission because, you know, he's scared, actually comes up with all the ideas that end up saving the day, like let's get air from the lungs, or let's, and I think that's just pretty clever. Some of the oh yeah, and there's also the laser is sabotaged, so we've got to cut off communication, and they have an early communication device in this called the wireless. You know, back in those days, it was like, wow, you can communicate without wires. Obviously, it'd be inconvenient to have little microscopic wires running out of this submarine, out of this guy's body. You know, so obviously the only way to communicate would be wirelessly. And I think that's very ahead of its time, very cool. The sub runs on nuclear power, which is pretty forward-thinking. I mean, obviously, you're not going to want a gas-powered submarine down there, you know? I mean, it's in a guy's body. Then again, could be exposing him to lethal amounts of radiation. I think the best method of propulsion would just be like, you know, have some pedals in there or something that the cyclist could pedal the submarine along. That's probably the safest, but, you know, that might not be fast enough. The movie really tries to be scientifically accurate, and a lot of cool biological facts are put forward in this movie. Like, for instance, blood isn't actually red, it's just the corpuscles, and most of it is clear plasma like seawater. Blood vessels are 100,000 miles long or whatever. You know, just some very interesting factoids like that, which, as far as I know, are pretty much true. There's the one about, you know, the lymphatic system. The main character is kind of the everyman. The audience insert asks, like, I only thought we were going through the circulatory system, and the guy's like, no, we can go through the lymphatic system, which is a different system, which you might not have known about. But this movie really exposes people to biology in a fun way.
The lymphatic system drains off excess fluid from the tissues.
I would rather watch this than take an entire biology class, because it's just more fun, because there's a plot and characters and shit going on, you know. And it really does pay attention to the facts, and I think that's nice. Again, this was shortly after the discovery of DNA, so there's not anything about DNA, but, you know, so what? It's on a cellular level. They're not going down to the DNA level, so that's fine. One thing I think is really ahead of its time and really, really great is how the guy's lungs are full of particulate. And Donald Pleasance takes one look at the guy's lungs and he's like, this is full of shit.
It's full of rocks.
Those are impurities embedded in the lung. Carbon from smoke.
It's full of like dust and smoke, and the lungs look so disgusting. They got all these wads of black shit in there. And for the 60s, you know, when tobacco advertising was still really high, I think that's groundbreaking to say, look at how your lungs will look if they're full of shit. And unfortunately, they have to pump air from this guy's lungs to breathe for the rest of their trip in this enclosed submarine. So they're breathing all this smoke and shit, all this particulate, and you know, it's just must be a drag. But I mean, you know, that's just amazing that this movie has a really gross depiction of a smoker's lung, and I think that's really, really brave for the movie. And Donald Pleasance's character, of course, is the one that notices it. He's like, this shit is messed up. And, you know, they'll save his body from the blood clot or whatever. They'll probably die like 3 years later. or 1 year, you know, because his lungs are so messed up. That's just really cool. The movie really pays attention to biology, and it's really nice. What else could be said? There's a running gag about the military guy, the sugar addict, I guess. It's kind of funny. And then at one point he sees an ant, he's about to kill it, but he decides not to kill it. And I think the movie's trying to say something about that or something, but it's just kind of like a running joke. I think it's kind of funny and entertaining, you know. So, I mean, yeah, this movie is just very, I wouldn't say ahead of its time. I would say it's pretty 60s, and it's very trippy. And a lot of the set pieces, like the giant dolly they have to maneuver around this tiny little submarine, or these radars that are going around this guy's head, or how his head is marked off into like a crossword puzzle. You know, that's obviously like very trippy and stuff, and could only be made in the 60s, because I mean it's just so psychedelic, I guess. Not really psychedelic, it's more like just the science of the time just boiled down into a movie. I wouldn't say it's ahead of its time, and you know, there's no like artificial intelligence or something, and like I said, the computers are very period accurate and period specific. They're not more advanced than what they already had going on in the 60s, but it's very 60s-ish, and I like that. And I think if you want to learn about the period, or you know what kind of stuff was going on back then as far as tech and science goes, is probably the movie for you. It has a very nice aesthetic. The submarine they travel around in is a really well-designed vessel. Obviously, whoever designed it, thought, what kind of ship could maneuver around in a guy's body? And I'm surprised it's not more well remembered. It's a nice vessel.
You can tell them the Proteus is ready.
The Proteus? What's that?
It's the name of this vessel. Sounds better than calling it the U-91035.
Yeah, I guess that's all there is to it. Just incredible effects on this thing. Every organ they encounter looks so real and so good. And obviously it's just like plastic or rubber or something, but the effect is incredible. And this is a great movie for all you CGI lovers out there. Watch this movie and tell me it doesn't look good. And like in some points, sure, you can tell that the submarine's just a plastic toy, but I'd rather it be a plastic toy than a CGI abomination, because then it'd look like shit. It'd look like a cartoon. And if it's a plastic toy, then it's an actual physical object. One of the coolest parts, I think, is when Raquel Welch gets attacked by the antibodies outside, and then when they get inside, they like crystallize. And it's like, how did they do that? What are these things made out of? I can't even tell. Like at first they're like rubber or something, but then they're like glass or maybe like plastic, or I can't even tell. That's just how good the effects on this thing look. You really feel like you've stepped into a person's body and you're seeing all this cellular stuff up close. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely incredible. I think the movie is a little... It can get a little old at times. It's like, yeah, we're the first people to see this. This is a first for mankind, and I just think that kind of sucks because it's not getting televised. It's obviously a very top secret operation. You'd think that at the very least it'd be televised like the moon landings. I mean, the first time anyone's gone inside anyone's body, so I mean, why not broadcast it? I do think this movie's delineation between inner and outer space is very interesting, that man is kind of in the middle, and that's been said quite a lot, especially these days when you can go beyond the subatomic and realize that we're just kind of in the middle. In fact, I think that's the premise of an entire Vsauce video. I think he just ripped it off from Fantastic Voyage, which, good for you, Michael, I guess. But yeah, I also think it's interesting that in the beginning it says we're about to land on the moon. Obviously, it was a very optimistic point in America's history, And everyone was like, yeah, we're going to land on the moon. Next thing you know, we're going to be flying submarines up people's bloodstreams, and I'm just kind of sad we don't live in that future. This movie is set in a near future type scenario. It just kind of feels like the 60s, old-fashioned 60s. The cars are 60s. Everything's pretty much just 60s. Although I will say that the decision to call the other side just the other side, just kind of generic instead of the Soviets or the Russians, ensures that this movie never feels dated. Obviously, it's a Cold War type scenario where, you know, it's a battle for technology and arms, and you want to get your technology first before the other guys do. But, you know, I just like that they don't call it the Soviets or the Russians, because that would really just make it lame and outdated. And, you know, for all we know, in this world, it could be, you know, really anyone. So I think that's nice. This movie leaves it up to the viewer's imagination exactly what the constraints of this world are, you know, how they're gonna get it, how they're gonna do so and so, and, you know, just you know, the politics of the world are kind of left out of it, and that's nice. It's a sci-fi movie without much politics. The only point, like I said, where it gets political is between Donald Pleasance and the other guy, and they, you know, they're like, is there a God behind this? Is God there? And it gets cut off pretty fast, obviously, because the movie's trying to be fun. It's not trying to be controversial or anything. I just think Donald Pleasance's character is really nice. He's a nice atheist, and, you know, at the end he's revealed to be the bad guy, and he dies, and you don't really feel sorry for him, because, I mean, he was a rat bastard, but, you know, at the very least, it's a good example of an early atheist type character who's, you know, just there for the ride. I think that's nice representation. As an atheist myself, I simp for Donald Pleasance's character in this. Also of note is the pilot guy, who's just this kind of like sailor who's not used to all this military science shit. He's just from the Navy, and he's a nice character. I like him quite a bit. He's fun, and he just kind of plays like the you know, third wheel, or I guess in this case the fifth wheel of the team.
Out of your element, aren't you, Captain?
Sort of.
And he just sits up in the top all the time, and he never leaves the submarine, and he just keeps it running. I think that's pretty cool. Also, that there is a saboteur, and that, you know, hypothetically, even though Donald Pleasance never states it outright, that the saboteur is working for the other side, so to speak. I think that really ups the stakes and the tension as you see, you know, 60 minutes winding down, and they've gotten lost, and they're, you know, facing all kinds of problems, and on top of all that, someone's trying to actively ruin the mission, and you know, that's just very cool. So just a very well-constructed movie, definitely a well-researched movie for the time, and definitely a great movie that should be shown in more anatomy classes. I mean, why isn't it? Why is it just Lorenzo's wax? There's a flippin' fantastic Voyage, the best movie about biology ever made. I don't know. Maybe some high school teachers are like, Raquel Welch is too hot in this, I can't show it to my students. In that case, you're the sexist. She's a good actress, it's a good movie. It's a perfectly fine sci-fi movie. There's nothing exploitative about it. Okay, sure. Raquel Welch wears a skin-tight outfit at one point. It's a scuba diving costume. All the guys wear the same costume. I don't see how that's sexist or exploitative. They all got the same costume on. It seems pretty equal to me. In fact, I'd say her character in this is probably just one of them, you know, a good example of a strong female character in early sci-fi, which you don't see much of. You know, why diss this movie so much? I mean, it's a fine movie. But I mean, yeah, you know, some people just don't like Raquel Welch, which, you know, I don't get that. She's a good actress, you know. She was the chairman of the board with Carrot Top, but aside from that, her filmography is okay. Anyway, That's Fantastic Voyage for you. A fun little sci-fi 60s romp with a lot of fun ideas, a lot of fun set pieces, and overall just a fun story that I haven't seen done to such an extent before or since. I think, if Disney didn't own the rights to Fantastic Voyage now, I would probably be pushing for like a Fantastic Voyage remake or sequel or something. They could get Raquel Welch back in it because she's still alive. But Disney would ruin it. Just like they're going to ruin the Home Alone sequel or remake or whatever that's supposed to be. So many properties that were owned by Fox were actually kind of good, and now they're just pumping out sequels to them on Disney Plus. What a shame. But Fantastic Voyage doesn't even need a sequel, so, why even care at this point? It stands on its own. It's a good self-contained movie, a good sci-fi romp, a good biology romp, and a fun time. Definitely check it out if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, you'll know just what a great movie it is. And it definitely leaves an impact on those who watch it for the first time. You'll be blown away by all the fun stuff that goes on in the human body right under our very noses, or should I say in our very noses. Ha ha ha. That's a joke. Anywho, that's going to be it for now. But write to Nicholas Cicada, 1424 Columbine Street, number 1, Denver, Colorado, 80206. If you want to support this content, more fun stuff like this is on the way. And as always, sayonara, suckers.